So the idea that as each person saw helpfulness, it made them more likely to be helpful to the next person, the next opportunity they had to be helpful, really supports this idea of modeling, right? I see somebody else being helpful and that makes me think I could be more helpful too. I'm going to model that behavior. I'm going to imitate that behavior. Reinforcement is another way that we may learn to be helpful, right? If we are actually encouraged for helping, we tend to become more helpful. So we have the mean number of tokens given on the y-axis. And so helping is defined in this experiment as sharing your tokens. So we see that when helping is rewarded, which is the left-hand side of the x-axis, you have more tokens given both immediately and 2 weeks later than if there was no reward or punishment, there was no feedback from the environment. And then, of course, when helping is punished, we have the fewest tokens given. So, we can directly reward people for being helpful, right? And I think that's in childhood, earlier when I was taking the evolutionary theory, I emphasized that this is a baby who's helping an adult. And the idea that evolutionary theorists take is that, well, the baby's so young, it can't really have been affected by norms or learning or anything. But babies are watching the people around them from the time they're born. And so the helpful behavior might be purely modeling. There may have been reinforcement that has occurred in that baby's household. Anytime that the baby has had an instinct towards helping, if the parents have said, wow, you're such a big helpful baby, thank you so much, things like that, that kind of reward can encourage helpfulness in the future. So I would just like to argue that the thing that I used as an example of evolution could potentially be an example of learning if we knew more about what happened in that child's household, stuff like that. Attribution. Okay, so one factor that can affect whether we help or not is whether we think that the victim is at fault for their own condition. When we make an attribution about how they came to be in that situation, we may be making an incorrect attribution. We may not know all the details about how the person came to be in the situation that they're in. But if we have come to the conclusion that they are in that circumstance of needing help because of things that they've done, we are actually less likely to help than if we've come to the conclusion that they're in that circumstance through no fault of their own. Now, it's not perfect, because if you recall, I talked about how, some people blamed Indonesia for getting hit by a tsunami, right? Like that was not Indonesia's fault, except for that, Indonesia is a coastal region. It's not Indonesia's fault that they got hit by a tsunami. Sometimes people will still say, oh, it's your fault that the random bad thing happened. But when we have a person who, for example, we've talked already a little bit about, blaming the victim when they get cancer, for example, the first thing that people will ask is, did you smoke, or, did you use Roundup or whatever, to try and sort of comfort themselves that the person who has cancer somehow brought it on themselves, and I'm not doing those things, so it won't happen to me. I think we do it a little bit when a person's needing help also. We look at their circumstances and we'll say, well, what role did they play in putting themselves into that circumstance? And that'll maybe make us feel less likely to become victims ourselves, because we'll say, well, I'll avoid that behavior. But it also sort of allows us to have an easy excuse for not helping. We can say, well, if they didn't want to be in that circumstance, they shouldn't have done that thing. So this kind of attribution can really have an impact on people's helpfulness. Another theory on helping focuses on the decision-making process. That, when we see somebody in need of help, there's a decision tree that we go through to decide whether we want to help or not. So first off, do we perceive that there's a need? Do we even notice that somebody is in need? If we don't notice anything, if we don't perceive that the situation that they're in is actually asking us for help, we're not going to help. The next step is, do we take personal responsibility for it? Am I the person who should be helping? If this person needs help, am I the person who should be giving it to them? If we think, no, there's somebody else who would be better qualified or knows what they're doing more, it's not my responsibility. I don't know that person. I'm just driving by. If we can say that, then we're not going to take responsibility. If we instead say, you know what, I think I am the person who's most likely to help, then we go to the next decision point and we say, is helping going to be worthwhile to me? Like, what are the costs and what are the benefits? And so one cost would be potential danger to yourself, right? I know I never stop and offer help to somebody who's got a broken down car on the side of the road. It's not because I'm not a nice person. I like to think I'm a pretty nice person, but I'm a pretty scared person. I'm pretty much like, is this a setup? And then I would also like to back up one step and say, really, am I the one who's best at changing this person's tire? I'm going to go with no. But other people would completely stop in that situation because, the benefit to them for stopping is greater than their concerns about costs, right? So for me, I go, no, it's too risky. Or, I'm dressed too nicely to help with that. Or it'd be too time consuming. I have to get somewhere. Or it would be unpleasant. It's too hot or it's too cold or whatever. A nicer, better person would say, okay, so it's worth my while. Now what should I do? And they try and figure out a way to help. At any point along this decision tree, we can be, moved out, and it makes us not help. First step, did I perceive a need? This is where a lot of times people think cars passing on the side of the road didn't even stop or help. A lot of times people passing on the side of the road have no idea what's going on, to the right, because they're busy driving. And so just because a car passed doesn't mean that the driver perceived what was going on. So they may not have helped, not because they were callous, but because they didn't perceive the need. If they did perceive the need, then we got that next level, like, what's my responsibility? For me, a lot of times my responsibility is calling 911. Like, for me, I go, okay, I'm here. I can see it. My job. So I'm feeling responsible. Yes, helping would be worthwhile because what I think I should do is call 911. And, I'm the 911 girl pretty much all the time because that's where I really shine, is passing information on, knowing where I am, describing what I saw. Like, these are my skill sets. My husband's much more likely to stop. He's much more likely to, give people water. He's much more likely to do all those kinds of things. So along the way, at any point, you might decide I'm not supposed to help. Now, one time when I was in graduate school, I went through this decision tree, not, step by step, thinking to myself, wow, I'm going through the decision tree. But I now looking back on it, know that I exactly went through this decision tree. My husband and I lived in this little house that backed up against this little old lady's house. And, we would talk over the back fence and stuff. And she was in her 80s. She had her little, 3-legged dog. And, she was living on her own and behind us. And so one night I was getting ready for bed, and our bedroom window looked out over the backyard. And just out of the corner of my eye, I could have sworn I saw a flashlight moving around back there. So I looked out the window to try and see, am I going to see it again? And oh my gosh, I did. I saw a flashlight moving around in our neighbor's house. Lights are completely off and there's a flashlight moving around. So I'm like, holy cow, what is happening at her house, right? So I of course, I don't really trust myself. I perceived a need. I thought it looks like somebody has broken into her house. But I'm like, did I see it wrong? So I call my husband and I'm like, do you see oh, there it is. Do you see the flashlight? Oh yeah, we saw the flashlight. So now we realize we are absolutely the only people who could have possibly seen this, right? It's nighttime. We happen to have the proper vantage point to see into her house. So we completely felt responsible. Then we thought, well, what do we do? So luckily, there was nothing really too risky or time consuming to do. We called 911, right? But of course, we don't even know the name of the street behind us because this is the olden days and we don't have Google Maps or something. And so we don't even know the name of the street behind us. So the cop actually came to our house and then my husband rode over there with him. And the cop did what they do when they think there's an intruder. He went all the way around the house, shining the lights in the windows and stuff. And then he pounds on the front door and he yells, Albuquerque police, and nobody answers. So they go next door and they ask, do you happen to know your next door neighbor's phone number or anything? And so the next door neighbor did know, and they called the number, and there's our neighbor answering the phone, and she's terrified. She says to her neighbor, there's somebody shining their flashlights in my window, and now they're pounding on the door, and I don't know what's happening. And the neighbor goes, it's the police. It's okay. Open the door. I felt so bad for misinterpreting that and scaring her so badly. I barely wanted to go in my backyard. I was like, oh my gosh, we almost gave her a heart attack. I can't believe that, I misjudged this situation so badly. And the cop was like, no, you did the right thing. You need to let us look. And I'm like, yeah, but she's hiding in her house thinking somebody's breaking in. I'm surprised she didn't call the police. But anyway, the next time I did see her, she was like, oh, honey, thank you so much for looking out for me. And she was so grateful. I felt so badly that, I blew it up and scared her. But she was like, no, you helped me. So that was terrifying. Turned out to be fine. And then I was like, oh, please don't have a stroke because I did this to you, Rose. I'm so sorry. But you can see why a lot of times people don't want to help because they're like, am I interpreting this right? Am I the best person to be going over there? Those kinds of thoughts are legitimate concerns. So I think it's really super important for me to kind of belabor this a little bit because I think it's really easy for us to sort of disparage bystanders who don't help right away and say, why didn't they do anything? And we need to be aware that a lot of times the first thing that we detect, we're just in shock and we don't know what to do. And then we have to go through this sort of decision-making process. So what other factors affect our helpfulness? Well, the mood that we're in. When we're in a good mood, we're more likely to help. When we're in a bad mood, we're less likely to help. One theory for why we're more likely to help when we're in a good mood is a theory called mood maintenance. You're already in a good mood. You want to stay in a good mood. You don't want to bring yourself down by walking away from a potential help opportunity and have to say to yourself, man, I didn't even help that person when I could have, right? And so it boosts your mood. If you've ever helped somebody, it does make you feel better afterwards. Well, in the case of my quote unquote helping Rose, I didn't feel better, but good moods increase positive thoughts. So when you're in a good mood, you're more likely to think, oh, that person needs my help, and less likely to think, oh, that person probably did it to themselves. Or I'm more likely to think, I can help that person. I have the skills. Or I'm less likely to think about possible risks. I'm more likely to think about positive things, positive outcomes. The thing is, the feel-good effect is short-lived. So a person who's in a good mood will be helpful for a short period of time. And then, that good mood starts to wane, and so does their helpfulness. Now, for some people, being in a bad mood in some circumstances, will lead them to be more helpful. And one interpretation of that is that they may be displaying a negative state relief pressure, where they're like, I don't like feeling negative like this, so I'll help this other person because maybe last time I helped somebody, I felt so much better and things like that. And so it'll help me to relieve my negative mood by being helpful. So it might be a little, self-treatment to be helpful, even though I'm in a bad mood. So it's just a way to make ourselves feel better, and it benefits everybody. All right, I think that's a good place to stop, and we will... Actually, I'm hesitating because let's come back in the next video and talk about empathy.